This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history podcast from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, April 1st, 1979, on the White House lawn, President Jimmy Carter staged a final showdown with the so-called killer rabbit. We've talked on this show about that bizarre news story in which Carter was paddling his canoe about a year earlier and was confronted by a rabbit that was swimming towards him. And the press loved that story. There were cartoons and jokes, and it kind of turned into a punchline, Jimmy versus the swamp rabbit. Well, this is the follow-up to that, when Carter, sick of all the jokes, brought a huge rabbit to the White House and in front of the press pool, chased it around on the White House lawn. They scuffled for a bit, wrestling on the ground. The rabbit got a few bites and scratches in, but eventually Carter prevailed. He pinned it down, tied it up, and held it triumphantly aloft in front of the assembled press. Quite the spectacle. And here to discuss Carter's act of rabbit vengeance are, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
We promised you all more animal stories. Yeah. And this is one that I actually kind of can't believe we haven't covered yet. It really is on par with Eisenhower and those squirrels, right? Remember that Eisenhower tortured those squirrels?
Yeah. Well, Carter tortured rodents after Eisenhower did.
Take that, you pesky rabbit.
All right. Do you think they bought it, folks?
No.
Kellie? No. Okay.
At least somebody out there did.
Somebody did. This is, of course, not a true story. It is an April Fool's story that I had fun writing. Though the Eisenhower War on Squirrels is true, and this is, like a lot of good April Fools, maybe sort of believable. I had written a whole line about how Carter then skinned and cooked the rabbit, and I was like, that's a little much.
Too far.
But,
like most April Fool's jokes, too far.
Yes. But happy April Fools, everyone. That Carter wrestling a rabbit story, not true. But I thought what we would do today for April Fools was run through actually some of our favorite historical hoaxes, stories basically in the past of people playing April Fool's pranks related to politics and history. And there are some really great examples out there. So let's rip through a bunch of them and see how people were fooled, why they were fooled, and see if they can come up with some lessons about what makes for a good April Fool's. We got a list in front of us here. Nikki, you want to lay out the first one?
I do. The one that I bring to you first is from 1992 and from NPR. If you're listening to a podcast, you probably listen to NPR at some point. So in 1992, NPR's Talk of the Nation program announced that Richard Nixon, who, as listeners know, in 1974 became the only U.S. president to resign from office, that Richard Nixon was running for office again. They roll out his new campaign slogan, "I didn't do anything wrong and I won't do it again." And they put together clips from his campaign speeches. You can imagine now with AI how easy this would be to do, right? So you have him sort of talking about his candidacy, and they play this out kind of like you did, Jody. They give it a few minutes, and they're like, okay, that's not really happening.
Well, that's a good one. So perfectly attuned to wind up the NPR audience.
Yeah,
you can hear.
Perfect.
People will be like, first-time caller, long-time listener.
Yeah, exactly.
Outraged.
You can hear the Volvo drivers of America screeching off to the side of the road when they hear this on their NPR. I started my career in public radio, and I think there's a long tradition of doing April Fool's pranks. There was one in, I think, the early 2000s about the exploding maple trees. There was this whole thing about how people weren't buying maple syrup anymore, and the trees would get big and big and big, and if they weren't tapped, they would explode, and they made the sound effect, and they would report from Vermont about the people being blown up by maple trees, and people bought it, for at least for a bit. But yeah, NPR is good at that. I think radio is particularly good at that because you kind of have to paint that picture in people's heads as you go through it. So I like that.
Very wholesome.
Yeah, I like that Nixon one. All right. Kellie, you got one for us?
Yeah, and this one I have real issues with because there's jokes and then there's, yelling fire in a movie theater. And this one kind of feels tantamount to that. So in 1976, The Patriot, which is a newspaper in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, published a photograph of the state Capitol building collapsing. And the caption right below it, custodian AF Day said the blast occurred during a joint House session addressed by Hubert Humphrey and Governor Milton Shep. And then Day attributed the explosion to an abnormal expansion of hot air, which is usually absorbed by acoustic seats in the chamber. And so it's supposed to be like, haha, very funny. But at the same time, people were mad.
Yeah.
People were like, you can't publish a photo of a building collapsing and people not be panic stricken. Like, it didn't go over very well. And
attributing it to hot air is a nice little touch.
Yeah.
I would say, but
There's a lot of lovely touches in this, right?
Yeah.
Custodian AF Day, April Fool's Day. I love that. But I mean, you're talking about the decapitation of the state government,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. If the House and the Senate are in session and the building collapses, you've like taken out the government of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It's not ideal.
no,
Too
it's not
big.
ideal.
No,
Yeah, it's a little much.
Somebody should have said, not a good idea. And then, of
Yeah.
course, they apologized 2 days later. They're like, sorry,
Yeah.
we overdid it.
And to compare it with the radio one you can immediately correct yourself and say April
Yes,
Fool's.
yes.
This one,
Oh, absolutely.
it's like people freak out for a day. It's a newspaper.
And it's
So,
1976, so there's
Yeah,
no
yeah.
other way to get that information
Right,
corrected
you can't go to
quickly.
Twitter and whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, let's go to 1971, where an April Fool's prank played by a state representative, a man by the name of Tom Moore, submits a bill that would honor Albert DeSalvo for his efforts in population control. So he submits this bill, and it works its way through, and a bunch of people vote for it. And in fact, the Texas state legislature unanimously passes this measure that honors this guy, Albert DeSalvo. Well, who was Albert DeSalvo? He is the man who'd been convicted 4 years earlier as the infamous Boston Strangler, the serial killer, population control. Again, this turns pretty dark. Now, to his credit, I don't know if it's credit or whatever, but Moore was trying to prove a point here that the Texas legislature, he was like, most of these representatives don't even read the thing they're voting on. They just approve stuff and they just pass it on party lines, or in this case, unanimously. And so he was trying to make a point here. This is a little much. I can't believe no one flagged this one, but it is a remarkable.
But also,
way to
I get
prove
that
the
it was
point.
like, I think we've maybe talked about the population bomb on here before. Like, there were anxieties about like the world population getting too big. I don't think you should pass legislation about population control if you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Very bad.
But anyway, this one got a lot of attention. People were writing it up all over the world. Moore obviously confessed that he was making an April Fool's joke. I don't, how do you go into work the next day?
I know.
Doing this to your colleagues.
I know.
All right, what's next?
All right, so I have also got one that has to do with the law. In 1954, Hal Lewis, who was a DJ on a Hawaiian radio station, announced that the Senate had just passed a bill that repealed islanders' income taxes and, in fact, provided for a return of the taxes that they paid in 1953. This was one of those things that was not entirely out of the blue, because there was a member of Congress from Hawaii, Joseph Barrington, who had just a month before demanded that the islanders in Hawaii be given a refund for all of their federal taxes if Hawaii wasn't granted statehood, right? If we don't get equal representation, we shouldn't be taxed. And it was going to be another 5 years before Hawaii gets made a state. And so Lewis makes this claim, and later in the show, the general manager of the station comes on air to publicly apologize for the hoax, to fire Lewis. That was also a hoax. The general manager was actually one of his colleagues who was in on the whole thing. Oh, my God. So for a brief moment,
don't joke the joke.
Hawaiians thought.
No, man.
Yeah.
And I feel like, don't joke about people's money.
No, I was just about to say, that's a cardinal sin. You cannot promise that you are going to give a paycheck, and cannot promise you're going to take something away. Like, people get in their feelings real quick about that.
Real fast.
Yes, especially if you're promising money, because people already start to spend that money before they even get it.
2 seconds in that conversation, somebody's buying a new car.
I know, I got home renovation. Come on through.
Fair enough. Of course, the IRS, no fun. They call and they're like, maybe leave us out of all future pranks.
Get our name out of your mouth.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. This, to me, is less terrifying than a state building collapsed, but,
Sure. And again, it's radio, so you get to correct it right away.
I'm David Remnick, host of the New Yorker Radio Hour. There's nothing like finding a story you can really sink into that lets you tune out the noise and focus on what matters. In print or here on the podcast, The New Yorker brings you thoughtfulness and depth and even humor that you can't find anywhere else. So please join me every week for the New Yorker Radio Hour, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Let's go to 1996, and this is a truly delightful one.
Yeah, now this story was funny. So Taco Bell basically purchases full-page advertisements in 7 major newspapers, including the Philadelphia Inquirer, and basically announces that it had purchased the Liberty Bell and renamed it the Taco Liberty Bell. And I was like, wait, what? And they basically said, hey, we want to help out with this national debt. Taco Bell is pleased to announce that we have agreed to purchase the Liberty Bell, one of the country's most historic treasures. And of course, the Clinton White House secretary decides to join in on the fun and basically says, oh yeah, we're doing a series of things like these. The Ford Motor Company is joining, and we're going to, rename the Lincoln Memorial, the Lincoln Mercury Memorial. And it becomes kind of fun and silly. I think people right away know that, no, there's not going to be a Taco Liberty Bell, but it's kind of fun to think about.
I enjoy this one. So I remember this one, by the way. This was, I think some people did fall for it because there is this trend, and I think it was alive and well in the 1990s, of just renaming everything after corporate sponsors. But
like
this
stadiums,
so funny.
but not national treasures.
Right, fair enough.
I love it. I also love that in the spirit of fun, Taco Bell decided to donate $50,000 for the preservation of the Liberty Bell, which is kind of cool too.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
The fact that the press secretary joins in on this, I'm just it's just a simpler time. There must have not been much going on in the spring of 1996 that everyone could just...
Those were the days.
Yeah. To me, this fits into the NPR prank in a really nice way. The best way to wind someone up is to go at something that they take too seriously. And this is good, right? Yeah. And the other stuff, oh, we're going to give you money. Psych, no, we're not. Or, oh, a building collapsed. Psych, no, it didn't. There's no insight there, right? And we're going after something precious, We're going after the Liberty Bell, get people in their feelings by something crude, with the Taco Bell. Like that, there's some good... And
the more outlandish, the more kind of okay, you got me, or whatever. But, you can't promise things.
I think that's definitely one of the lessons here. All right. Well, I want to talk through this one mostly because I want to hear what Nikki reacts to. And this one is I guess a prank, an April Fool's joke, but also is just so convoluted and full of all sorts of interesting elements. But in 1991, on April 1st, Rush Limbaugh, massive, obviously conservative radio voice, goes on this screed on his show on that day where he talks about how he wants to tax the poor. And he starts railing about how the poor don't do anything. They don't contribute to this country. They do nothing but take from us. We want to get serious about raising the taxes on the poor. We have to balance the budget. We have to do it on the backs of the poor. And he goes on and on and on and on for a while. And then he says, no, wait a minute. That was an April Fool's joke. I didn't mean any of that. And then he goes on to say, but listeners, think about it. Well, did you believe what I had to say? Well, what does that say about how gullible we can be? And then he starts talking about all these other conspiracy theories. And he's like, this shows that how gullible we can be and how much we can believe in this. We don't know what to believe. But Nikki, this is where I want you to jump in. But I'm I'm reading this thing from Rush Limbaugh. I'm like, but this kind of isn't that far from Rush Limbaugh's actual politics. This is a weird prank for him to be playing.
This is such a weird prank and exhibit A in conservatives can't do comedy.
Yeah.
Because it requires, you have to be so deep into a set of premises for this to work. Because basically one of the premises that he's working off of is, there's this idea in the media that conservatives are so hard-hearted and they would go out there and take money from somebody who doesn't even have anything, which you'll believe anything because you're already bought into those ideas that the right is just so cruel and will only do cruel things. But this was part of the 2012 campaign, that idea that you have to have skin in the game and that everybody should be a taxpayer even if you don't have any money, that we don't need people who are taking more than they give to the government. So I think it's just a little, it doesn't really work.
What it is? It's that good jokes should never punch down. And so the fact that this joke is demonizing poor people does not feel funny. Because a lot of people are poor, and it just does. Nobody wants to be the butt of that joke. If you wanna eat the rich, if you wanna talk about the rich, you know what I mean. Like, cool, fine. Like, no one's hurting when you mock a rich person. They're gonna be fine. But you just can't. There are certain jokes that will never fly because it just feels like punching down.
Yeah.
Well, right. If you think about like the emotional track that this takes you down, or the emotional journey that this takes you on, what you're hearing is somebody say, we should tax poor people more. And if you disagree with that, you're like, that's awful. No, we shouldn't do that. Why would we do that? And then the relief that comes at the end is, no, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. And you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, I'm glad we're not
but
doing
you're
that.
also
like, there's no
dumb and gullible
like,
for believing
exactly.
me.
Right. I mean, he's insulting his own listeners because he immediately turns around and says, that prank I just played about taxing the poor, which frankly, you cultivated your listeners to a point where maybe they would be okay with that. But, he also then says, just take a moment to think about how dumb you are that you just believed me when I said all of that. Well, it's like, well, dude, we're listening to you. Like, we're putting our faith in you. But then he turns it into, I mean, it is this really fascinating text because Limbaugh then does this thing where he says, you people bought it, hook, line, and sinker, and you ought to ask yourselves, what else are you buying that may not be true? What else are you willing to believe? How about ozone depletion? How about global warming? Why do you believe that? And it's like, oh my gosh.
Oh,
so now he's, of course, then turning it and using it to, but anyway, Rush Limbaugh can't do comedy.
No. And he would be a horrible partner. I feel like he would gaslight his spouse all day, every day.
But I also think that this kind of gets at why I don't necessarily love April Fool's pranks, especially when they're coming from media figures. All you have is your credibility.
Totally.
Right? Isn't that the whole ballgame?
I think that I love those NPR pranks. I actually think that they're very sweet and gentle, and they're not harmful. But imagine NPR doing that today.
No, I know.
In an atmosphere of misinformation and disinformation, and when they're being dragged in front of Congress for being anti-American, like that could be used to dismantle the entire organization or be used against them to say, like, look, you can't believe anything they say. And it just feels like kind of perilous to gamble your credibility, even for something that is lighthearted and fun.
Yeah.
I mean it's why I don't like the White House Correspondents' Dinner for the same kind of reason. It's like, wait a minute, we're supposed to take you seriously. We're supposed to put our faith in you, but then you just turn around and you make jokes and have drinks together. It's just something's off. So
right, that you're supposed to hold powerful people to account, but now we get a little glimpse behind the curtain of y'all just laughing together.
Yeah. I don't like that vibe either.
Well, let's leave it there with our run through of some historical April Fool's pranks. Folks, if you hear of any or see any or have any other examples, do let us know. You can get in touch through the website. But happy April Fool's. May your guard be up all day. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Even with demand for maple syrup at an all-time low, some farmers still release the sap that is built up over the winter. They're the prudent ones.
All right there, Harvey. Open the valve. She's a-rising.
Got it here. Got it. Move back there.
But now, after production has declined by a steep 58%, the process is all the more precarious. An untapped tree is a time bomb ready to go off.
Watch it. Be careful there.
Untapped maple trees can explode like gushers, causing injury and sometimes death. If untended, quiet stands of nature's sweeteners can turn into spindly demons of destruction. The Vermont Health Board reports 87 fatalities, 140 maimings, and a dozen decapitations from sap buildup explosions this year. That's the highest ever.
Radiotopia.